deep knowledge
Yeah,
because you know you can dig in on the internet
that's
pretty
right.
far.
That's right.
So it's kind of interesting.
I guess we're meant to begin migrating up there.
Looks like they got one more mic to put on.
Okay.
Yeah. So, do you have some plans to go back out to Korea soon, or are you going to spend
Um,
any summertime there?
I am thinking of my mother is turning 80 this summer,
Oh, really?
and so I thought about
But where's she?
she lives
Okay.
2 doors away from me, but I
Okay.
thought about taking
Oh, okay.
her
All right.
out while I do research
Just
as
keep it
a
Okay.
she always says, "Oh, that was my last
Yeah.
trip. This is my," and everything is, it's Korean melodrama. So
Yeah.
there are some relatives who won't be able to come here to celebrate.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm
How
thinking
soon? Yeah.
maybe late summer, early fall when it's not so hot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I just have to get my dread of trans-Pacific travel, um, under control.
Yeah.
I just can't stand the long rides.
Yeah. Well, the older you get, the longer the trip becomes.
Yeah,
So,
and then the recovery.
yeah. Yeah.
I was
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have a pen? Um, Thank you so much.
Thank you. 언제 오셨어요?
응?
언제
어제.
오셨어요? 어제? 이제 여기 끝나시고는 어디로 가세요? 어디로 가세요?
워싱턴.
워싱턴으로? 벌써
Atlantic
Get
House.
started.
아,
So we're going to get started in a minute if everyone's had a chance to finish their lunch and grab a bite of dessert. We have a terrific panel of Korea experts and participants that I'll introduce in a minute. I have a couple of announcements slash warnings to read to you before we get started, though. One is that everybody is asked to completely turn off, not just to vibrate, but entirely off your cell phone or electronic device because it can interfere with the sound system. And there's also a warning that today's meeting is not for attribution if you intend to write or tweet about it. With that said, welcome to today's Council on Foreign Relations meeting, the Inter-Korean Summit, Implication for U.S. and North Korea Relations. I'm Joseph Kahn. I'm the managing editor of the New York Times, and I am joined, starting directly from my left, by Sun-Hwan Kim, who is visiting professor at Hanyang University and the former Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade for the Republic of Korea. To his left is Catherine Moon, who's a professor of political science and the Wasserman Chair of Asian Studies at Wellesley College and a senior fellow at Brookings. And then we have Chung In-moon, who is currently the special advisor to the President of the Republic of Korea for Unification and National Security Affairs. And to his left is Scott Snyder, who is the CFR's own Senior Fellow for Korea Studies and Director of the Program on U.S. Korea Policy. He's also the author of South Korea at the Crossroads, Autonomy and Alliance in the Era of Rival Powers. So we'll get started with one seemingly simple but actually somewhat difficult, I think, question based on our earlier discussion, which is I'm going to ask each of my colleagues up here on the stage 2 questions and ask them each to assign one number on a scale of 1 to 10 to each of the 2 questions. The first question is, what are the chances when President Donald Trump meets Kim Jong-un sometime soon, within a month or 6 weeks or so, of some kind of concrete agreement emerging from their summit meeting that both sides sign and proclaim as a victory? Scale of 1 to 10. We can start right here to my left with Mr. Sun-Hwan Kim.
My answer is 7.
7. Okay.
My answer is 6.
6.
Mine is 9.
Yeah. And I'm also a 9.
And 9. All right. That's the first question. The second question, also a scale of 1 to 10. What are the chances of that agreement, if signed, leading in a linear fashion over some period of time to the real denuclearization of North Korea as a result of the agreement? And we'll start again with Sun-Hwan Kim.
I think it may be 7 again.
No, 7. Okay.
6 over a long period.
Okay. 6 with a caveat. Okay.
9 within 2 years.
Wow.
And I'm a 2.
You're a 2.
I'll be
on that.
willing to come up if we get additional data points.
Okay. Okay. Good. So we have a spectrum. So I'm going to start because it's a very nice spring, even summer day outside, and we're all maybe in a slightly optimistic mood. So I'm going to start with the Special Advisor to the President for Unification and National Security and ask, why are you the most optimistic in this group, and why do you see double 9s on the 2 big questions?
Very simple. Praise makes even well stands. Optimism breeds optimism. And I think that I attended the summit banquet in Panmunjom last week, and I could tell that North Korea is really committed to denuclearization. Okay, if North Korea is committed to denuclearization, then North Korean leader will make the summit with Trump successful. And also, given the tweets of President Trump, apparently he seems to be committed to making the summit successful. And out of that, I make the conclusion that there are nine chances of, having successful agreement between North Korea and the U.S. and 9 chance of denuclearizing North Korea. But whole point is that I gave a 2-year time period, because if it is dragged, as Scott and Kathy may point out, there won't be any denuclearization of North Korea. Once agreement is made, then denuclearization should take place in very compressed time span.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to the other end of the spectrum, which I think, Scott, you are occupying out there on the far left. Optimistic that there'll be some kind of agreement, much more cautious that it will lead to permanent denuclearization. What's your calculus?
Yeah. Well, I think President Trump's personal interest in having this meeting and wanting it to be a historic success means that it's likely that it will occur and that it will be successful. But I also think that there is a not negligible possibility that we may end up with a less than satisfactory deal. And what I see is the Panmunjom Declaration is a partial framework for moving forward on this issue, and the denuclearization part of the framework has to be built by another contractor. And so the challenge of coordinating, both horizontally with South Korea, and also the challenge of coordinating vertically between Trump and the institutional bureaucracy, I think are two factors that make me very hesitant. So I see the possibility that Trump will make a deal, but it'll be a bad deal, and that he'll probably be able to sell it.
Sun Hwan Kim, you were the former Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and you've been exposed to negotiations of this sort many times in the past. You're kind of seeing a nuance somewhere in the middle. What are your assessments of what will happen both in
You
the
see, I'm usually saying that I'm cautiously optimistic. So I'm optimistic because this time we see many good signs here. Chairman Kim, he voluntarily stopped nuclear tests, and he said that he will invite, sorry, my voice is not so good because our air in Seoul is not so good. because, New York is better than. And he also pledged to invite foreign experts and journalists to the scene. And the Secretary Pompeo said he talked with Chairman Kim on CVID, and even my president, he raised this CVID issue during his summit with Chairman Kim, and he didn't raise any other opinion on that. So I'm a bit optimistic, but I'm cautious because if we look at the Panmunjom Declaration, that part, they have all 13 articles and 3 parts, but this denuclearization part is only 1 article there, and it is a part of peace regime. Actually, I expected that Chairman Kim himself pledged with his own voice, but he didn't do that. If he did, I thought it is much more convincing to the people of the world, but he didn't. And in terms of formality and also that contents, they say complete denuclearization, but I'm not sure whether it means complete and verifiable and irreversible denuclearization. So we have to confirm that in this coming summit. That's why.
And Professor Catherine Moon, you are also cautiously optimistic slightly, but saw a very long process playing out. What's your rationale?
Well, I am a cautious person in general, and I am an optimistic person, but that doesn't necessarily make me cautiously optimistic. Makes me optimistically cautious. I have there are many reasons why I hold myself at 6, but 2 main ones I will offer here. The first is that with denuclearization, every step of the way, it needs to be married to economic goodies that are offered to North Korea. North Koreans will not denuclearize without quid pro quos of some kind. That's the whole point. One of the main reasons why they're even talking about denuclearizing. So the costs will be high, and also the coordination, not only between the U.S. and the North, but also South Korea and the DPRK, Japan and the DPRK, Western Europe, the United Nations, the large international community that has the funds and the will to support this process will have to basically cough up the money. And trying to coordinate that and be persuasive, I find it'll be difficult, especially because Mr. Trump is not particularly that popular around the world and not known for his diplomatic skills. So other people are going to have to work hard. Perhaps we should recruit Monsieur Macron of France. The second is that even if an agreement is made, and even if there is an intention, sincere, on the part of the U.S. and the DPRK to pursue denuclearization rapidly or over, a longer period, bottom line, the U.S. Congress has to accept and agree and ratify and provide the funds for both the denuclearization efforts as well as the economic goods that will be eventually could be eventually transferred to the DPRK. I see the U.S. Congress, I always have seen the U.S. Congress as probably the institution in the United States that will be the hardest to win over.
Can I make a two-finger intervention?
please.
But if you look at in Article 3 of the Panmunjom Declaration, and if you read very carefully, then you will see very interesting linkage between building peace regime on the Korean Peninsula and denuclearization of North Korea. The Article 3 says that North and South Korea will declare end to the Korean War and transformation of armistice agreement into some form of peace agreement within this year. Okay? And then there is a link to the complete denuclearization of North Korea. But as Minister Kim pointed out, not only just Mr. Pompeo, but also South Korean officials, when they talked with North Koreans, we made it very clear, CBID, complete, verifiable, and irreversible dismantling of nuclear weapons. And there is a full understanding on that concept by North Korea. The issue is a matter of sequencing of whether place CBID at the beginning or CBID at the exit. That is a big issue.
Right.
Okay. And another one, in fact, what is surprising during this Panmunjom summit last week is this. North Koreans didn't mention anything about economy, only just reconnection and modernization of East Coast Railroad system, Seoul Shinjuku Railroad system. Even that one, what they agreed is to have some sort of joint committee to study the feasibility of the project. And also, we all know President Trump will not spend a penny on North Korea.
Yes.
Therefore, we are all preparing for it. And fortunately, you're not in, European Union or China. If Japan, if kidnapped Japanese is resolved, then they can come up with a consortium to help North Korea, if North Korea really committed.
Yes.
Okay? But what really matters to the United States is whether and how the U.S. can lift the sanctions on North Korea. But it all depends upon to what extent North Korea is willing to go for denuclearization.
So we're going to talk a little bit more among ourselves for about 25 minutes or so, and then we're going to open it up to questions. And I want to add one thing to my opening announcement, which I neglected to say, that we're both thanking the Council on Foreign Relations for convening today's meeting, and also the East Asia Foundation. So thank you for that. Professor Catherine Moon, let me start a round of questioning with you and just discuss a little bit your best understanding of Kim Jong-un and what his motivations are, what explains the flurry of diplomacy and statements that we've seen from him beginning really just right at the beginning of this year. And what appears to be anyway, a very decisive shift in his approach to the outside world. What's your best understanding of what's motivating him?
Several ways to answer your question. The first is that, in my view, North Korea does not do anything off the cuff. They are planners, and they have been working and aspiring to some kind of a breakthrough with South Korea for a very long time, as well as a meeting with the United States president. Doesn't matter who it is. The grandfather, the father, and now the grandson, they all have been preparing. The entire dynasty has been preparing to meet the United States president. So I would say that the North Koreans most likely wanted to achieve a nuclear status that they feel comfortable with, to bring themselves to any table as a, quote, respectable power, and not have to kneel and bow and scrape and be treated in a derogatory way. Pride is incredibly essential to all Koreans, not just the North. And I think they achieved that. They declared themselves at the end of 2017 that they're satisfied. And what's very important is not just that they're satisfied with the nuclear advancements, but that they had last April and numerous statements and speeches that Kim Jong-un has given to North Koreans inside North Korea the emphasis was on economic development. In due time, we will focus on better standards of living for all people and bring economic development to the people. Just last April, the Central Committee of the Korea Workers' Party had a plenary, and they again emphasized economic development. So I look at his efforts as in line with what we so-called North Korea experts know as Pyeongjin policy, the parallel advance. Economic development, military development, including nuclear. The military side is satisfied to some extent, and now the emphasis will be on economic. The second thing I would say is many people talk about the squeezing of the sanctions, et cetera. I am more skeptical on that, on the impact of the sanctions, and we can have a debate. But also that the North Koreans are very good at finding opportunistic times. And the Pyeongchang Olympics was about the best show that they could have participated in. So I think the timing is not a minor thing. And the third thing I would say is, I'm somebody who studies North Korea from inside out. Everybody pretty much likes to look at North Korea from the outside in, but even a dictator needs buy-in. Even a dictator needs to have some sense of public opinion and satisfaction or dissatisfaction in his society. North Korea is basically a market economy. I'll say it again. North Korea is a raw laboratory for market economics. The public distribution, the state centralized economic system is dead. The overwhelming majority of the people cannot survive without participating in low-level or mid-level or high-level trade, barter of some sort on a daily level. Kim knows that. And unless he can get access to funds, technological know-how, basic skills about economics, and revitalize his society, he will not be able to stay in power. It's not nuclear weapons it's not US power that threatens his regime. I look at it as, if he can't deliver the economy, then he will have on his hands serious criticism and possibly dissent.
So, Sung-Hong Kim, you were the Minister of Trade as well as Foreign Affairs. Do you see the motivations of the North Korean leader as being heavily impacted by economic considerations? And let me ask you one further point.
Yeah.
Do you think that Kim Jong-un could be the next
mean,
Deng Xiaoping?
To a certain extent, he think of economic issues as well. But as you know, always North Korea's, Kim regime is the priority is how to maintain their rule there. So, Chairman Kim, he may think now he has his own arsenals there. So if it is helpful for them to maintain his rule, he can use this one and he can give up. And at the least, I think he understands he cannot make any economic growth under these sanction regimes because the current sanction regime is different from previous ones. They never had sanctions as severe as now they're having. So it may affect that. And also, when I was in the government, I was dealing with his father. And he looks different from his father a bit. And because I can see from his words, he's more open and candid. Because he even acknowledged his mistakes and he made apology to his own people. So it is different from his father. So it seems to me that he is trying to make North Korea as a kind of normal country. And also he wants to get, because he's a young leader, he wants to show his people that I'm a good leader and I'm this capable, and through this economic development. But in order to make economic development, he needs to get assistance from abroad and from foreign countries, but he cannot do anything under this sanction regime. So that's why he's thinking about how to use his already have nuclear arsenals, which he already have. So I think that's the motivation. Yeah.
Chung In-moon, let me ask you to pick up one aspect of what was just what was just said, particularly comparing Kim Jong-un and his father, Kim Jong-il. Both, well, his father as well reached a denuclearization agreement with the outside world through the and engaged in very prolonged negotiations in the six-party talks. And as we all know, that ended up collapsing, and there was a resumption of the nuclear program. How do you read the current leader? Is he following his father's playbook, or do you think he's a fundamentally different person with a different set of objectives and motivations, making you more optimistic, as you said you were, that there will be a verifiable long-term agreement this time?
But there is a fundamental difference between his father, grandfather, and Kim Jong-un. If you look at the 1994 Geneva Agreement framework, then also if you look at the 2005 September 19th joint statement, whatever, Kim Gye-wan, Vice Foreign Minister, or Kang Seok-ju, first Vice Foreign Minister, they signed it, not himself.
Right.
But this time, Kim Jong-un himself committed that I will go for a complete denuclearization, and I will make nuclear weapons free Korean Peninsula. But that makes a big difference. And second difference is that during the Kim Jong-il period, his father's period, his father went through the period of so-called Ardos March of hardship. And in that context, he created a new ideology called the military first politics. And then he was placing emphasis on Gangsung Daeguk, the strong, prosperous, great nation. For him, the building military strength first and economy second. But from Kim Jong-un, from his son, I discovered a very interesting twist of change, like the old Meiji period, what Japanese called the Fugoku Gyohei, meaning rich nation, strong army. In fact, Meiji Japan started with a rich nation, strong army. Park Chung-hee of South Korea imitated it, and Deng Xiaoping of China also imitated rich nation, strong army. It is my personal observation that Kim Jong-un is following that route. In fact, when he visited Beijing last month, in fact, I was told by someone who is close observer of Xi Jinping Kim Jong-un talk. In that meeting, Kim Jong-un made a statement saying that we should have adopted the opening and reform earlier. We missed that chance. Okay. Then finally, let me add one more point. November 29th last year, North Korea test launched the Hwasong-15, which is intercontinental ballistic missile. After launching it, he declared, we completed nuclear weapons capability. Okay? And all of a sudden, but remember, North Korea just testified one Hwasong-15. You all know, experts know that in America, the U.S. should test launch at least 15 to 16 times in order to assure stability and accuracy of ICBM. He did only once. And also he didn't prove that the Hwasong-15 made a success in making re-entry, okay, and also making accurate targeting. Then now we have one puzzle. Why would he made such a hasty conclusion that now we have complete nuclear weapons capability?
Yeah.
And then starting from January 1st, he began to chanting economy first, economic development. That means what? In fact, he was using ICBM, whatever, and some kind of bargaining leverage.
Catherine, you wanted
with the
to
United
jump in on
States.
that point.
Yeah, I just want to back up some of Professor Moon's comments and also pick up Foreign Minister Kim's comment about the fact that denuclearization, the word had not been, the D word I call it, that it had not been uttered by Kim Jong-un himself during the Korea's summit. But what is really interesting, and again, if we look at what's going on inside North Korea, is the next day after the summit on Saturday, the state television, the state news service, and the Korea Workers' Party major newspaper, all of them covered the Inter-Korean Summit and published the Panmunjom Declaration, the agreement that Kim Jong-un signed in full text, no doctoring up, and also had the Nodong Shinmun, the Korea Workers' Party newspaper, had multiple pages of photo spreads and articles celebrating this achievement, and also spoke of President Moon Jae-in, his wife, and the Korean delegation quite respectfully. This stands in contrast to Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, the grandfather and father's time. Whenever they had so-called summits or agreements, they were not featured to the public. And to me,
No,
this
it's not true. I attended both first summit and second summit as a special delegate. Nodong Shinmun featured them, not
No.
in detail.
what I'm
Not
saying,
detail, yeah.
did not feature them in this kind of a celebratory and epic-changing, era-changing
That's
way.
I agree with you.
To me, this is absolutely more important than Kim having not, if Kim had uttered denuclearization and the newspapers had not had this, I would have been worried. But so I don't worry that he didn't say it. My optimism comes partly from having seen the actions of the state machinery now beginning to prepare the North Korean public that some kind of change is definitely happening.
You're sounding a little bit more like you're toward a 7 or an 8.
I'm still at 6. I'm flexible.
Scott, let me ask you to jump in on one point, and just on that analysis of Kim Jong-un and whether your instinct is that his motivations are more of a wholesale strategic realignment, or whether there's a possibility that he's pursuing these talks as a more tactical way to ease sanctions, buy some time for his regime, et cetera. Where do you fall in that?
So I'm willing to keep an open mind, and I don't think that we have the evidence yet to determine whether this is a turn or whether it's a con. And so we have to wait and see. And I agree, largely with the panel. Basically, Kim Jong-un was the producer, Moon Jae-in was the director. The show was inspired by Trump, and there's somebody who might want to turn it into a serialized reality TV show out there.
Yeah. Let me, now that you've mentioned our president, let me ask you an American-centric question on this, which is, going into these talks and knowing what we know now, how much credit do you assign to Donald Trump for the changing situation on the Korean Peninsula? How much credit does he get for what happened?
Me?
You can start, yes.
Okay. Well, I think, including myself, in Korea, many intellectuals, we think Trump, he's the only one who can deal with North Korea. Because, first, he's not bound by precedents or formalities. And he always makes his own decision based on out-of-box thinking. That's why we have some hope that he will make a deal. And also, one of the main reasons why North Korea came to the negotiation table is his maximum pressure policy. It worked. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Catherine?
Can I do a scale of 1 to 10?
Yes.
I would give President Trump about a 2. And you know what? I really don't think that question is particularly an important one. It's not about getting the credit. It's important in getting Trump motivated because that's how he works. The South Korean president has done a spectacular job diplomatically of boosting the ego of Mr. Trump as well as Mr. Kim. And I found his demeanor throughout the summit and this whole several months process of careful diplomacy fascinating, because Moon Jae-in basically was very, very humble and was happy to take the sidelines or the back seat and put other people forward in order to get the job done. And I think the critical question is, are Mr. Trump and Mr. Kim able to get the job done? There are a lot of people who could take credit, but to me, that we can only assess that after we have some real consequences that we can see on the table, real actions in the long run, short run, medium term, long run.
I give it 7.
You're going to go with 7.
No. The reason is very simple. Yes, as Scott pointed out, Kim initiated, and President Moon facilitated. But I would say that they are necessary conditions, but sufficient condition came from Trump. On January 4th, Trump made a phone call to our president saying that, yes, go ahead, talks with North Korea. Yes, we are willing, I agree to delay joint military exercise and training. Why not for those 2 blessings from Trump? We could not been able to talk with North Korea, okay? And North Korea would not respond to us by sending delegation to Pyeongchang Olympics. Therefore, in this sense, I want to give credit to President Trump. And as a matter of fact, President Moon Jae-in has officially given credit to Trump because Mr. Trump's maximum pressure on the North Korea and encouragement and blessing of President Moon's talk with North Korea. I think when those 2 were combined, he played a very important role bringing some kinds of so-called magic touch on the Korean Peninsula. In that regard, I want to give credit to President Trump.
Scott, how much credit are you ready to assign to the Trump foreign policy team?
Not as much as he's willing to take. President Moon and Professor Moon are very generous to push all of their chips over in front of President Trump. And I do believe he gets credit for prioritization, for sanctions implementation, and for challenging North Korea's core assumptions through rhetoric. But ultimately, the actors so far have really been on the peninsula.
Mm-hmm. So I didn't, beyond saying I'm managing editor of the New York Times, I didn't introduce myself fully with relation to this question, and I had the honor or maybe the burden of being the Beijing bureau chief in 2005, 6, and 7 when we had a very extended round that you may recall called the Six-Party Talks that were had a lot of international attention at the time. China was extremely excited about the diplomatic opportunity that the Six-Party Talks suggested. They actually had a full room built and a giant hexagonal table with each member of the Six-Party Talks having their side of the table where they could convene, and they convened many, many times in pursuit of an agreement that never materialized. Let me ask you, and I'll start with Chung-In this time. What are the chances that the U.S. is beginning a process which will go on for a long, long time and will not at the end, necessarily satisfy all the parties, but the process will end up taking over the diplomacy once it gets started? That each element, the armistice, the denuclearization, the timing of sanctions relief, will consume multiple parties, multiple diplomatic delegations for many, many months or years.
Not the multiple actors, with regard to declaration of the end to the Korean War. That can be done by, North, South Korea, U.S. and China. They are the, North Korea, China, and the U.S. are the legal parties to armistice agreement. South Korea is a de facto party to the armistice agreement. Therefore, declaring the end of war and transforming armistice agreement into some sort of peace treaty or agreement, it won't take a lot of time. Mm-hmm. Okay, and then if we make that kind of progress, then North Korea should make very prompt progress in denuclearization. But here, we all, experts all know, when you talk about denuclearization, freed first and declaration of North Korean nuclear facilities, materials, and weapons, and missiles, and challenging inspection of those stuffs, and after that, verification, and actual dismantling, and verification after dismantling. This process takes us a long time, okay? Therefore, if we adopt that kind of approach, then, as Scott and Kathy pointed out, it could be dragging. But if President Trump and Kim Jong-un can make a big deal, what some experts say is a big bang. at the outset, come up with, if North Korea say, okay, here are our bombs, you come inspect and dismantle.
Yes.
That being the case, then so-called inspection and verification of nuclear materials and facilities came later. But what really matters is the nuclear bombs, right? Therefore, I hope that President Trump would make that kinds of big bang deal with North Korea. Then that being the case, then things can move much faster. But if you follow the traditional non-proliferation expert, it will take years. But if you turn around and make a big bang at the beginning, then things can be very different.
Seung-Hwan, do you see Big Bang approach, or do you see something more akin to what we went through with the six-party talks?
Well, even though we have a Big Bang agreement, I mean, implementation should be phased one. Otherwise, I mean, practically, in reality, it's very difficult to do that. And it takes a lot of time, and technically, it is not easy to have multiple inspection at the same time. So if we can make that kind of Big Bang agreement, and if we can put the timeline for that within a year, at least 2, I think it is a full success of this agreement. But I'm not sure whether we can do that or not. And also the problem is, if it takes 2 years, for example, at the moment, we can see that Chairman Kim is in full control of North Korean military, but I'm not sure whether he can continue to fully control the military for a whole process of denuclearization. So, I mean, if Jong-un said North Korea accepts that, yes, we'll show you our stocks and just inspect. It will be okay, but that possibility is not that high, I think.
Yeah. Scott, assuming you would agree with the statement that if Donald Trump is offered the choice, he would also prefer a Big Bang kind of outcome to this, what would be your advice to the U.S. team going into this round of summitry? What should they be prepared to offer going into this? How do you get a Big Bang, a verifiable Big Bang agreement out of one big meeting? What can the U.S. delegation do to ensure that?
So the conclusion I'm coming to is that the only way that you get from here to there on Chung-in's time frame is if North Korea makes a lot more unilateral concessions. And so that's actually outside the bounds of what I think the U.S. team can deliver. But the critical, I think, issue that people are going to be focusing on is how do you match up a declaration of intent to a serious process. And that's where I worry about peace versus denuclearization and how you keep them interlocked as you move forward, because they really have to go together in order for the process to be
In
successful.
old days, North Korea used to pursue so-called salami strategy or salami tactic. For example, if North Korea gives up, nuclear testing site in Punggye-ri, then they would put it on the negotiation table and would try to get the reciprocal, concession from the United States. But this time, they're not using it as a bargaining chip. They're just putting ahead, okay, we are destroying it. 2 tunnels in Punggye-ri are still usable, but we are going to, destroy them transparently by inviting experts and journalists from the U.S. and South Korea. But there is somewhat really, unprecedented, judge the North Korean past behavior. Therefore, the reason I'm being somewhat optimistic is this North Korean behavior is very different from the past. In the past, it was a salami tactics. Give a little bit to us and take a little bit from us. But this time, they're giving some more. But I think that kind of changing behavior really breeds some kinds of optimism in the forthcoming meeting between President Trump and Chairman Kim Jong-un.
Yeah. And Catherine, you felt that in your initial comments that if there is a denuclearization program, it's going to be a long process. Do you see the long process as being akin to that sort of multilateral diplomacy, many, many meetings over many years before we get to that goal? Or do you think there really is a prospect for something like a Big Bang agreement?
I would say somewhere in between is preferable. I'm very uncomfortable with this big bang when we're talking about nuclear weapons. A big splash, maybe. You know? I don't see a big bang or a big splash as I mean, what the two, Kim and Trump will most likely try to have a big splash when they meet. That's just how they are, their personalities. Whether or not that translates into an actual agreement that's workable is a question. I have a couple concerns, which is that it's not, I think this time around there should be no six-party talks. It should be at most DPRK, ROK, the US with China on the sidelines, but being brought in and out. I am firmly a believer that this time around the Koreas need to basically hold on to the reins and be the ones who direct their future for practical as well as moral reasons. They have the most to lose and the most to gain. And definitely don't bring Japan in, no Russia, but keep them very, very integrally informed, and definitely bring in the EU, those members that have the funds in particular for future purposes, and also a liberal institutionalist mindset so that they add some kind of a normative momentum and give, quote, the support of the international community. But I think six-party talks, I never believed that that would get anywhere, mostly because the parties themselves had very different agenda items pursuing their own national interests in very, very minute ways. It was not a common cause. Right now, between the two Koreas, the reason why things are working is because they have put a common cause, a landscape, a new landscape out there. And I think if the US can participate in that kind of a new landscape, a new vision, a new common cause, that's possible. As far as the US's role, though, I see it as much more complex than Professor Moon, because the US, the armistice agreement was signed by the Chinese Communist Party's People's Volunteer Army. It was not the PRC government per se, and that army no longer exists. It was superseded by the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, the Chinese military. The United Nations was a signatory, and so the United Nations has to be brought in. The US's role in the UN is not particularly strong, so we're going to have to build up on our own, the United States, some credibility for leading a new path on this. And then, because South Korea was left out of the armistice agreement, there has
we refused. No, we are left out.
Whatever, not part of the signing. It has to be brought in some way that makes legal sense. So when we talk about the legalities, there are a lot of technically competent people who can work that out. But I don't see it as simply a diplomatic deal that can be made among the U.S., North Korea, South Korea, and China.
Okay, so we're,
But I want to add some words. Well, I mean, even though U.S. Kind of make a Big Bang or whatever it is, agreement with North Korea, the question is, North Korea already invested a lot of money in developing their own arsenal so far. So at some point, they need kind of compensation for that. So I mean, the most important part will be when and under what conditions we'll lift the sanctions or will ease our pressure on North Korea. And in the implementation process, in the past, US government, after they make agreement, they don't want to pay US taxpayers' money.
Right.
Always it's Korea and Japan and, as Cassie mentioned, EU. So I think this, I mean, President Trump, he doesn't want to pay any money, any penny to North Korea. So I think in the later, some implementation process, we have to involve China, Japan, maybe Russia. They contributed small money in the past. EU, they contributed as well. So Korea will share lion's burden, but lion's share. But Japan, we have to involve them, and China as well. And particularly China, if we don't have cooperation from China, we cannot guarantee the success of a whole implementation and negotiation itself. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So we're going to open it up to members here in New York. We also have some members participating on teleconference, and we may get some written questions as well. A reminder that this is not for attribution, and please wait for a microphone to be brought to you after you're called on. Yes, sir, right in front here. And please identify yourself.
Hi,
for
I'm
everyone at-
Lee Siegel. I do work on North Korea. My question is mainly for Chung-In. You know that the North Koreans want a fundamental change in relationship with the United States and South Korea, and with Japan, that it's not about money. Now, you've said this could happen quickly, and you put the focus on a peace treaty or peace declaration, but do you think that's adequate for the North to feel reassured that the relationship is fundamentally changed? And secondly, with respect to the treaty declaration, which is it? Because South and North don't recognize each other, therefore a treaty as a legal thing is a little tricky. So which is it? Obviously a declaration would suffice, but it's different. And how does the United States join in it? Is it a treaty? Is it a declaration? Is it a commitment? Trump has said he was willing.
What North Korea want with regard to regime security. In fact, what North Korea want is several. When our special envoy speech to Pyongyang, Kim Jong-un made it very clear. Okay, if there are no military threats and threat to our regime from the United States, I am willing to go for denuclearization. And denuclearization is will of my grandfather and father. That is how he responded it. Then afterward, we have been checking what North Korea want. They want verifiable, inspection and dismantling of American nuclear weapons in South Korea, which does not exist. Second, they want that the ROK U.S. combined military training would not mobilize, would not deploy nuclear weapon usable strategic weapons. And North Korea also want that American declaration that U.S. would not use would not undertake conventional nuclear attacks in North Korea. Fourth, some form of peace treaty or peace accord with the United States. And finally, normalization of diplomatic relations between. Not that far, just no diplomatic normalization. But on the other hand, then I told North Koreans, I met the North Koreans, and I told them, look, those are the military threats. How about regime, security? How can the U.S. assure your regime security? What they're telling me, very interesting things. What you want is recognition from the United States. We want U.S. treat us as a normal country, and we want, American McDonald's and Coca-Cola coming into North Korea. American investment banks would come up with a consortium, make an investment in North Korea. If more American people, goods, and American capital get into North Korea, then then U.S. will not attack North Korea. Yeah. And they are in fact talking about Chinese path and Vietnamese path. Therefore, that may not cost a lot of money, but as Kathy pointed out, that once North Korea really committed to denuclearization, I think we can come up with international assistance very easily, because then North Korea will be admitted to the IMF, World Bank, Asian Development Bank, Asian Infrastructure in the Investment Bank, okay? And South Korea, we can come up with our own, ODA fund, Overseas Development Assistance Fund, and etc. EU can help us, Australia can help. Therefore, really, if North Korea gives up its nuclear weapons in verifiable and irreversible way, then there will be really bonanza for North Korea.
I see Barbara has her hand.
Oh, that was about your second question. We talk about later. That's much more complicated.
Thank you. This is Barbara Demick from the Los Angeles Times. I guess this is a question for the South Korean participants. Do you think that South Korea is as insistent on CVID as the United States? And do you envision a possible situation where the peace process advances between the Koreas and the U.S. is left behind, such as happened when Kim Dae-jung was president and you had George W. Bush and this rift opened up?
Why don't you go ahead? I will follow. I have been talking too much. Please, Minister Kim.
Well, if we reach agreement, it should be CVID. And as I already said, there are some good signals on that point. But I mean, before negotiation starts, we can say good things. But if negotiation starts, usually it is a bit different. And because I'm more bound by the past experience than Professor Moon, so we'll see. Yeah, as President Trump said, only time will tell whether North Koreans are really committed to CVID.
Right. I think South Korea has spent quite some of time in talking with North Korea on CVID. Even President Moon spent quite some of time explaining CVID to Kim Jong-un. Therefore, there is no difference in concept of CVID. But as I pointed out, the sequencing of CVID, there could be some difference in that. But whole point is this: United States wants CVID at the beginning. Therefore, North Korea just give it up, like Libya. Okay, then we'll give it a reward. Therefore, dismantle first, be CVID first, and reward later. But the North Korean position is incremental, synchronized, action for action approach to CVID. Therefore, now South Korea is trying to very hard how to really reconcile between the two approaches. Okay, that I understand that South Korea is working with the United States to come up with some kind of roadmap for CVID. Therefore, there's that kinds of difference in sequencing of implementing CVID. But as to concept of CVID, there's a full agreement among Pyongyang, Washington, and Seoul.
Okay, just here in this corner.
Jeff Laurenti, thank you for an illuminating discussion. I was particularly intrigued by Kathy Moon's trying to raise the curtain a bit on the internal politics of North Korea. And our notion of the regime is essentially founded on dear Uncle Jay and dear elder brother Kim and the rapid dispatch with which they could be eliminated, basically a regime of terror. And you're suggesting that you actually have behind the curtain constituency groups to which Kim Jong-un would have to feel somewhat responsive. So I guess the question is, how much is the North Korean military invested in this nuclear weapons program? How much freedom does he have to abandon it? What constituencies hidden in the North Korean polity would actually be supportive and strengthen him when he takes this risk with the military? And I guess complementarily, what is President Moon, presumably the real Nobel winner here, what is President Moon's capacity to deliver what's been a pretty divided South Korean public and Congress? The newspapers are largely conservative run and suspicious of all this North hugging. So on both sides, in a sense.
Yes.
You go ahead first, then
Yeah, I think that's
South
a
Korean part.
critical question. When my colleagues on the panel here were talking about that things could happen rather rapidly if people really have the will, et cetera, I mean, I was sitting there thinking, well, militaries don't move that fast. Just any military, by definition, an institution. And so I would say that for Kim Jong-un to have conducted the diplomacy so far up to now so well, he had to have gotten the buy-in of at least the top brass that matters. That's period. Otherwise, he couldn't have come out, okay? And he brought top-level military officials. I was just telling my colleagues at lunch, the numerous scenes and videos of the summit meeting, they were all fascinating, but the one that jolted me most was this by a North Korean general to the president of the ROK, not the DPRK. I mean, that was a phenomenal photo. So that signifies that the top leadership is on board, but we don't know what the different ladders of the military have in mind. They might be very nervous about losing class status, access, and also nuclear scientists. There are so many newspaper publications or articles out there in North Korea and on state TV extolling all the military and the technological scientific community that helped bring these, what do they call it? The treasure swords,
Treasured sword.
the treasured sword, nuclear weapons, to be real. And so how are the people who created and maintain and still research these weapon systems going to be treated? That's a big question. So I think both sides have the deliverability issue to deal with, and I think in both sides, North Korea at least can control its media, right? And as I mentioned, the North Korean media has favorably colored these events. South Korean media cannot be so easily controlled or controlled at all. So, Professor Moon.
Yeah, well, what is having attended 3 summits, first and second summit, we couldn't see any uniformed military officers. Even during the farewell luncheon hosted by Kim Jong-il at the Baekhaun State Guest House, Vice Marshal Cho Myung-nok and even Lee Myung-soo, who came this third summit, they all had private clothings, no military uniforms. But this time, Lee Myung-soo, he's chief of staff, of North Korean People's Army, and Park Young-sik, defense minister, they came with official uniforms. And also foreign ministry guys, Lee Soo-young, who is the vice chairman of Central Committee, as well as chairman of Foreign Affairs Committee of Korea Workers' Party. He's in charge of entire foreign policy. And Lee Yong-ho, foreign minister. They all showed up, in addition to party officials. But first and second Korean summit, everything was orchestrated by the Department of United Front that is in charge of inter-Korean relations. But this time, for the first time, foreign policy establishment, defense establishment, they all showed up. That tells us that Kim Jong-un came up with some kind of national consensus in Pyongyang, and they brought them. And there is a message, don't raise any questions. But again, as you pointed out, there is a concern, because once progress is made in inter-Korean peace treaty and whatever, institutional interest of the military will be compromised. If nuclear weapons is removed, institutional interest of the military will be compromised. More than that, as a result of that kind of move, North Korea will be having opening and reform. Then party and the cabinet will be having more power. The military will be somewhat marginalized. Then to what extent the opposition from the military would be, and to what extent Chairman Kim Jong-un can handle it. As to South Korea, now picture is very different. 92% of South Koreans supported the Panmunjom Declaration. Now, Moon Jae-in's popularity soared to 80%. Yeah, some newspapers like Joseon-ilbo and some of the conservative newspapers are still making case, including distortion of my article in Foreign Affairs just 3 days ago. Now that has become a big issue in Seoul, but it's amazing public support of President Moon Jae-in. And I don't see any kinds of polarization and bickering. Up until very recently, there was some polarization in South Korea, but now there's really amazing public support of Moon Jae-in.
Okay, let's, yes, right here.
Thank you very much. My name is Joanna Weschler with Security Council Report. And Professor Catherine Moon mentioned the fact that the UN will need to be brought in if something is going to be resolved permanently and effectively between the two Koreas. I wanted to ask anybody who would like to answer, what is, in your mind, in your view, the impact, if any, of the last over 10 years of principal engagement by the UN, which have been sanctions, and sanctions have also been increased very, very dramatically in the last year and a half. The measures got up. So did it play any role in what has happened most recently or not?
Who wants to take that role of the UN?
I think the prospect of sanctions has probably played a role, but I don't think that sanctions themselves through the Security Council resolutions have yet had time to make their full impact. And so what was interesting to me about Kim Jong-un's decision to change direction is that it shows that he has greater situational awareness than I think a lot of people thought that he had previously.
Every step the United Nations will be involved in it. For example, suppose North Korea goes through denuclearization, then there must be the new resolution to reduce sanctions on North Korea, right? For example, suppose North South Korea and the United States adopt some kind of peace accord. Maybe it would be much better if the Secretary General of the United Nations serve as a witness, like going back to Camp David. Anwar Sadat and Manassan Begin reached the peace accord, but witnessed by the President Jimmy Carter. In that way you can involve in 1A. Okay? Therefore, as Kathy talked about, this armistice agreement is really complicated because when it was signed by the leader of North Korea, Kim Il-sung, and Peng De-hoi, who is a commander of Chinese and People's Volunteer Forces, and General Clark, who was a commander of United Nations Command. Okay, but United Nations Command was taken over by American commander in South Korea. Therefore, now commander of American forces in South Korea is a commander of American forces in South Korea, commander of ROK-US Combined Forces Command, and commander of United Nations Command. Okay? Therefore, United Nations has every, chance to involve in the setting peace settlement in South Korea.
What does the Panmunjom Declaration have to say about how the South Korean government is seeing that process evolving, though? Kathy laid out the legal process, but it kind of seems like y'all are focused on a political process that actually stands as an essential prerequisite to a legal process.
The whole point is this, United Nations was a signee to the armistice agreement, but United Nations, practically speaking, was never involved in. It was American business. Okay, and as Kathy pointed out, the Chinese people's, so-called volunteer, support force disappeared because in fact, most of them was members of PLA. Okay, but they was improvised because at the time China did not want to officially involve the Korean War. Therefore, they improvised, people's, volunteer support force. Okay, therefore, if you look at the legal issues, there are all kinds of complications. Therefore, even declaring the end to the Korean War or peace agreement, I think they should be politically settled.
I'll just add another complication, which is that North Korea from 1994 or so to 2000. What do I write here? 2013, on 5 occasions, basically withdrew from the armistice agreement. Periodically they just say, "That's it, we're not in this. It doesn't matter. We won't abide by it." So technically speaking, they are no longer part of the armistice agreement. I'll just throw that out.
Okay. Yes, way in the back there. Yes. And then to you right afterward. Thank you.
Matthew Herlock. I'm a lawyer. My question is, what, in a longer term perspective, what outcome does China really want to see from this? And therefore, is it not possible that though they'll talk nice, they might just work to frustrate a constructive outcome because they like instability at some level in North Korea or on the Korean Peninsula?
Thank you. Who wants to pick up the chunk?
No, I don't buy that argument. The Chinese official position is what? Peace and stability of the Korean Peninsula, denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, and resolution of all pending issues through dialogue and negotiation. That those three principles have been unchangeable principles of China. Therefore, China would support. But whole issue is whether China should be part of this entire negotiation or not. Now, Foreign Minister Wang Yi is visiting Pyongyang right now. Maybe depending on his negotiation with North Koreans, Chinese policy on whether it is involved entire process or not will be decided.
But Sun Huang, do you have a feeling that China is active enough in these negotiations? Are they feeling a little bit on the sidelines? Or are they a little bit wary?
Yeah. At the moment, they are not directly involved in the denuclearization process, but I mean, at the least, in the making of peace regime on the Korean Peninsula, we talked about the legal, political issues, but legally, they have a right to participate in there, and we should engage them, because without having cooperation from China, we cannot have, desirable outcome from the negotiation itself. Because if China, there is some sanction measures there, then maybe North Korea will have second thought on that. So that's why we need to engage China, and their cooperation is very important in the whole process.
Okay, there was another question just on that back table. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Rick New from CV Star. You mentioned the possibility of economic opening up of the North Korean market to the world. What specific forms of opening up or economic development initiatives potentially we can conceive, given the history of North Korea and also its latest unsuccessful try with China in a Chinese capitalistic business model? Thank you.
Professor Moon,
Right now, it is very important for us to understanding the structure of North Korean economy. North Korean economy has a formal economy. It's called the people's economy. That is the official planned economy. Then North Korea has also second economy, which is a military economy. Okay, and third, there is a so-called unification market. There is official market organized and administered by the party and the cabinet. Fourth one is a farmers market. There's informal market. Okay, and fifth one is a blank market. Depending on the scholar, there's some different estimation, but a lot of North Korean the expert dealing with North Korea would argue that up to 50 to 70% of North Korean economy is run by unification market, farmers market, and blank markets. Even North Korea, there are so-called new capitalists called the donju, the money holders. Some of them should have come from China, and they make an investment in apartment constructions. Now, according to recent report, that their three-bedroom apartment in Pyongyang would cost almost $300,000
Or more.
or more, depending on. Definitely, North Korea has been changing, and plus, and then what would be the North Korean model? In fact, North Korea has been denying that we are not following Chinese model, but they have been following Chinese model. Okay, now North Korea has 25 special economic zones, and they'll be expanding more economic zones, special economic zones, following the old 12 special economic zones of China along the East Coast. Okay, therefore, in other words, North Korea is ready, but the whole point is that North Korea has been pursuing damn nuclear weapons. Every opportunity was blocked. Therefore, if North Korea give up nuclear weapons, then there can be, inflow of massive foreign investment, like in China in 1980s.
I would be a little more cautious. We're both moons, we're not related, but we work well together. He's been a wonderful mentor for decades now. And now I'm grown up enough in my 50s to argue back. Number one, the last thing China wants, the gentleman before had asked about instability, the last thing China wants is instability in the region. number one priority is stability. So in whatever form, I'm positive, I think we all are, that China would help move towards security, stability. But the China-North Korea relationship is a difficult one. And I do not see North Korea following the China model, and I don't think that the North Koreans should follow the Chinese model. For one, the Chinese modernization process required paying attention to huge swaths of the Chinese landmass that were predominantly agricultural. North Korea has been industrialized since the 1960s. And even if its industrial plants and its other types of facilities and the technology have really declined over the decades, the sense of identification as an industrialized country is very, very strong. So the emphasis has to be on bringing manufacturing back and also advancing technology to assist the agricultural sector, but it is not the kind of full-fledged modernization that China undertook. And if we treat North Korea like some developing country, a backwater, the North Koreans will react because they're very proud of what they accomplished. And they had been better off in GDP as well as various indices of well-being, human well-being, up until the late 60s, early 70s. They were better off than the South Koreans, and they're very aware of that. As far as the North Koreans go, they have a love-hate relationship. They have a like-hate relationship with the Chinese. On the one hand, they know that they can get things from China, obviously, the imports that have sustained them. But the diaspora from the North, people call them defectors, migrants. When I speak with them, they talk with such anger, resentment, and venom, I would say, at Chinese, especially individual entrepreneurs who have come to North Korea over the decades and acted like they're going to lord it over the North Koreans, scoop up industry, scoop up land, and the North Koreans are very fearful about that. They do not want the Chinese to buy up land, buy up North Korea. So I think in a strange way, they might even be more amenable to the Japanese or the Americans, the imperialists, than they might be to the Chinese. And the Chinese themselves have been burned through joint ventures with the North Koreans because the North Korean legal system for businesses, the accounting system, it is just atrocious. So if you're thinking about how to do business, we need to figure out first, how do you get basic knowledge, basic skills into North Korea? And when the North Koreans work with US NGOs and other groups, what they ask for is training in English business English, as well as in international business law. So that tells you the kind of things they want and the kind of things that we all will need in order to engage with North Korea.
Okay, we're just about out of time. We have time for one more question, if it's a succinct, preferably on a scale of 1 to 10 kind of question. Yes, right here.
Thank you, Arlene Getz from Reuters. I'll be very succinct. You said that Kim Jong-un has situational awareness. How is President Trump's decision on the Iran deal likely to affect these negotiations?
I think that what the North Koreans are looking for is very different from the Iran deal in that the U.S. DPRK relationship is a central desire for North Koreans as part of that engagement.
Any other worries about Iran, especially given the possible deterioration of the Iran
In
agreement?
fact, Mr. Pompeo asked that question to Chairman Kim Jong-un. Kim Jong-un replied to Mr. Pompeo that Iran's case is irrelevant to us. Therefore, the deal between North Korea and the U.S. is the deal between the two. Iran factor would not interfere with the U.S. DPRK negotiation.
All right, well, thank you. That was a fantastic discussion on the panel, and thank you all for joining us.
Okay. Good
Okay.
job.
Thank you.
So-
Yeah.